Fantasy football drafts are swiftly approaching for the 2025 season. So let's break down 5 wide receivers that are deep sleepers, 5 players that you guys can grab at the very end of your fantasy football drafts. You could end up having a ton of upside and be viable flex options all year long. All right, if you guys have been following the channel this offseason, you guys already know that Marvin MMs has been one of my favorite late round wide receivers to target in fantasy football drafts. And Marvin MMs is a player going at an ADP of 133.2, who I think brings a tremendous amount of upside going into the 2025 fantasy football season. I believe in this offense under head coach Sean Payton and Bo Nix moving into his sophomore season. I think they're going to throw the football even more than they did last year. They're going to throw the football with even more efficiency. Remember, the first couple weeks of the season last year were pretty shaky for the Broncos, but starting in about week 5, onward, they really started to click. And then at the end of the season, we saw Bo Nix and company just clicking on all cylinders, it felt like, and had some really big shootout games, some really nice fantasy performances for their main stars. And while Marvin Mims was relatively quiet throughout the course of last year, he did get going at the end of the season and all the way through week 18, although only up to week 17 mattered for us. But, we saw a ceiling of 30.2 fantasy points in week 17 against Cincinnati and some other nice performances, especially also against the Cleveland Browns in week 13 with 19.9 fantasy points. And my belief all offseason long has just been that chemistry between Bo Nix and Marvin Mims will bleed into the 2025 fantasy football season. And once again, we are looking at deep sleepers here. We are looking at players that, you're not spending a ton of draft capital on, and we're going for upside dart throws. And I think that's exactly what Marvin Mims will be. I don't know if he's going to be perfect every single week, but I think that the upside will be there, especially against soft secondaries. And we look at the makeup of this roster right now. While Evan Ingram has come over at the tight end position, the wide receiver 2 spot's kind of up in the air here. Remember, a lot of people expected the Broncos to take like a first round wide receiver in the draft, and they did take Pat Bryant in the 3rd round. I do think that Pat Bryant will end up having some sort of role here for the Broncos, but between Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin, and Devon Bailey, as well as Marvin Mims, things are kind of up in the air here in terms of where the volume is going to go. And my personal belief is just that Marvin Mims is going to be one of those players that chemistry from last year bleeds over into this season. Going to be one of those players that has the opportunity to take over as a wide receiver 2, even if, once again, there's some boomer bust here. I think he's going to take advantage of that opportunity and end up being a strong flex candidate throughout the course of the season. So a little bit shaky here. We got a lot of names and potential options, but I think that Bo Nix in his sophomore season is going to be able to feed a lot of mouths as we approach this coming season. So I'm in on Marvin Mims at his current ADP. I think he is a great deep sleeper wide receiver for you guys to target. All right, let's move along to a veteran wide receiver. That's Christian Kirk, now of the Houston Texans, moving from the Jaguars over to a divisional rival in the Texans, and coming off a season where he only played in 8 total games. Disappointing year to say the least, especially after 2023, where he only ended up playing in 12 total games. But I think that Christian Kirk is in a really good position here where he's going to be able to play out of the slot, be a true security blanket for CJ Stroud in a season where CJ Stroud is going to be needing help at the wide receiver position with the departure of Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell out for the entirety of the season, more than likely. And we do have Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel coming in here, both of those rookie wide receivers. We still have John Mechie hanging around and Xavier Hutchinson in his 3rd season, but I think that Christian Kirk is going to be the perfect wide receiver to just come in, take over an expected role, and be, once again, like I said, a true security blanket for CJ Stroud. And we go back, over the last 3 seasons, right? In 2022, Christian Kirk averaged 14.2 fantasy points per game. In 2023, he averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game. And we're only 2 seasons removed from him being the wide receiver 11 overall in fantasy football. So do I think he's going to be the wide receiver 11 this year at the Texans? No, especially not with Nico Collins in front of him. But I do think that he could easily, if he stays healthy, be a top 35 wide receiver going into 2025 if everything goes his way. And once again, we're not spending high draft capital drafting Christian Kirk. And this offensive line has improved in the offseason for the Houston Texans. I know we saw that kind of sophomore slump for CJ Stroud last year, going from over 4,100 passing yards to just over 3,700 passing yards, in his sophomore season. 23 passing touchdowns to 20 passing touchdowns and 7 more interceptions in 2024 compared to 2023. But ultimately, those numbers aren't crazy different, and he threw the football more in 2024 than he did in 2023, and overall had more completions in 2024. But all things, aside there, offensive line play is better, and I do think that the passing game will be better for the Texans in 2025 because we can expect some positive regression. And once again, while I do like the rookies on this roster, and I think one of the two guys at the very least will come in and be able to carve out a role, for me, the player who's going to come in immediately and have a role is going to be Christian Kirk. If we're looking at players behind Nico Collins on this team. And right now, the running back position with Joe Mixon injured is completely up in the air. So who knows what the run game is going to look like, at least to start the season for the Texans. The emphasis will be on the passing game, in my opinion. I think Christian Kirk, an absolute steal and a great deep sleeper at the wide receiver position for you guys to target in your upcoming fantasy drafts. Next up, we have Rashad Baitman of the Baltimore Ravens going at an ADP of 143 overall on the Sleeper app. And once again, if you have been following the channel throughout the course of the offseason, this has been one of my favorite late round dart throw players, a player who, in my opinion, is solidified into the wide receiver 2 position for the Baltimore Ravens. And I get it. I know DeAndre Hopkins, was added to this roster in the offseason. Outside of those guys, though, we have no real true productive names at the wide receiver position. We got Zay Flowers. Sorry. I was assuming Zay Flowers, you would already know, right? Flowers, Bateman, Hopkins. Outside of that, nobody here. Don't get me wrong. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, when healthy, will get a bulk of the volume in the passing game here. And obviously, between Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, and some very good looking running backs behind Derrick Henry, this will be a run-first offense. But once again, in my opinion, Bateman is the true wide receiver 2 on this roster. I think Hopkins will have some good moments, have some, spike weeks, and maybe score some touchdowns, be a red zone option. But he's coming off a season where he had 56 catches for 610 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. Hopkins finished as the wide receiver 48 last year. Bateman finished as the wide receiver 40 in full PPR, 45 catches, 756 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns, and 16.8 yards per catch. That's what I like about Bateman. He is an upside type player who, once again, it might be tough to trust him every single week in your flex, but when you need to just throw somebody in there to give you some upside, especially against soft secondaries, Rashad Bateman can be that guy. We looked to last year, he gave you double digits in 7 games last year. So while once again, that's not amazing or anything, he does have the capability to give you those high ceiling double digit fantasy performances. His total ceiling last year was 23 fantasy points in week 15 against the Giants. And when he does get in the end zone, he does give you that opportunity to score double digit fantasy points. It can be a little bit hard to predict because this offense is so good at running the football. But at the end of the day, last year was still a very solid year for Rashad Bateman and a promising year after the first 3 years of his career were definitely not promising and did not live up to expectations. But the Ravens in this offseason did award him with a new contract. He's going to be a part of this offense, going to be a part of this team, undoubtedly. And once again, in my eyes, he's the true wide receiver 2 for the Ravens, can give you some really good spike weeks throughout the course of the season. Once again, we're not spending high draft capital on him. He is a great late round dart throw at the wide receiver position that you guys can absolutely end your mock drafts and fantasy football drafts with over the next month. All right, let's shift to 2 rookies to end the video, and let's talk about Dant Thornton of the Raiders. This has been a player that I've really grown to like throughout the course of the off season, and I really expected earlier in the off season for Jack Besh, the rookie out of TCU, to be the wide receiver for the Raiders, or rookie wide receiver for the Raiders, that we would be talking about at this point in the off season. But he's been falling behind in the wide receiver competition, and ultimately I will go ahead and say I think the pecking order, without Brock Bowers included, in terms of just pure wide receivers on this team, is still Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, and then Dant Thornton. And that's really what we've seen throughout preseason and training camp action so far. But I think it's pretty safe to say that Dant Thornton has carved himself right into the wide receiver role for the Raiders. And I mean, new quarterback Geno Smith, all he's done throughout the course of training camp is raved about Dant Thornton. We've seen a really good chemistry and connection between those two guys, Geno and Thornton, throughout the course of training camp. We've seen some big plays throughout training camp. And once again, I mean, it's easy to overreact to preseason and training camp. And Dant Thornton's first preseason game, he caught 1 of 3 targets for 17 receiving yards. So it's not like it was anything crazy, but I think he, at the end of the day, is just completely solidified into that wide receiver 3 role. And I do think that Trey Tucker is still a talented young wide receiver, but I don't know if he's more talented than Dant Thornton, right? And I do think that Thornton could take over some volume from Trey Tucker, even if right now Tucker has earned the wide receiver 2 spot on this team. But at the end of the day, the Raiders offense is going to be better this year. They're going to have a fluent running game. They were one of the very worst teams in the league last year in terms of running the football. That will change under head coach Pete Carroll with rookie running back Ashton Genty. Don't need to break that part down. And obviously, I mean, Brock Bowers is going to be the focal point of the passing attack, and I have been really high on Jacoby Myers throughout the course of the offseason as well. And I do think those two guys will see the bulk of the volume in the passing game. But once again, opportunity is knocking here for Dant Thornton, who has made absolute waves throughout the course of training camp and enough in preseason, especially when it comes to who Geno Smith is preferring in terms of a potential security blanket. I think a player that could end up getting a lot more volume than some people are expecting. So this is a true late round dart throw, a great late round dart throw in underdog drafts and best ball drafts where things are a little bit deeper. A good late round dart throw, I think, for you guys in deep leagues in general. This is a player who maybe you're just keeping a strong eye on at the beginning of the season in terms of waivers, but he should absolutely be on your radar, in my opinion, one way or another. And this is a player who you can absolutely draft the very last draft of your redraft drafts right now and come out with a player that could ride the bench for a little bit potentially, or end up being a viable flex option with some nice boomer bust capability early and often in the season. So keep your eyes absolutely peeled on Dant Thornton. Let's talk about one more rookie wide receiver. That is Tory Horton of the Seattle Seahawks. And this is another player who's had a lot of preseason hype, right? We look in his first preseason action in that same game that Dant Thornton played in against the Raiders, right? Seahawks Raiders in week 1 of preseason. Horton had 3 catches off of 7 targets, was heavily targeted for 31 total receiving yards and scored a touchdown. And I know in preseason, it's really, really easy when a player scores a touchdown to kind of overreact because like we haven't seen touchdowns scored in so long. And, I get it. I don't want to overreact here, but Tory Horton has also been looking really good throughout the course of training camp. And Sam Darnold is the type of quarterback who's going to need multiple security blanket options. And while I do think Cooper Kupp is locked into the wide receiver 2 role here, and while there are other interesting names on this roster at wide receiver like Jake Bobo, for example, I think opportunity could absolutely be knocking here. JSN's locked in as the wide receiver 1. There is a little bit of a tight end battle right now. Save that for another discussion, right? But in terms of wide receivers, like MVS looking like the veteran wide receiver 3 here next to Tory Horton as, the rookie option. And like I said, Kupp locked in as a wide receiver 2. But in terms of Cooper Kupp, he's age 32 going into his 9th season, coming off of 3 straight seasons where he's played 12 or less games. And don't get me wrong, I mean, Cooper Kupp could be fully healthy this year. He could also definitely be injured this year and miss some games. And I think that's going to open up the opportunities for Tory Horton to come in and fight for that wide receiver 2 spot next to MVS. And I mean, MVS is a very different type of wide receiver compared to what Tory Horton can bring to the field. So I think that at the end of the day, Tory Horton could end up, if you believe, like if you're out on Cooper Kupp and believe he's complete dust and like he's just going to be an injured, plagued player this year, then you should be in on Tory Horton, because once again, look at his ADP, 272.6 on the sleeper app. Might move up a couple of spots by the time this video comes out because of preseason hype, but this is a true late round, end of the draft selection. Once again, a really good player, I think, in underdog drafts right now to take at the end of drafts. But in terms of redraft formats, this is a player that, at the very least, once again, keep your eyes peeled early in the season on the waiver wire, but also a player who you could end up drafting in deeper formats or just at the very end of your draft to hold on to, because I really think that Tory Horton could have a big role in the Seattle Seahawks offense in 2025, especially, once again, things are kind of up in the air across this roster. I will say, under Clint Kubiak, this is going to be a run-first offense. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet are going to be heavily utilized, but this is not a great offensive line for the Seattle Seahawks, and they could definitely be forced into more throwing situations than I think Kubiak actually wants. And I've talked a lot about Walker and Charbonnet throughout the course of the offseason. I still love both of those guys, but I still think this is going to be a team that will be in a lot of situations where they need to throw the football. And once again, opportunity could absolutely knock here if something happens to Cooper Kupp. Quite frankly, even if nothing happens to Cooper Kupp, which I'm never wishing injury on any player, if nothing happens, I mean, JSN, Cooper Kupp, and Tory Horton could end up being 110% all viable options in this offense. Sam Darnold was able to support both Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison last year. So don't get me wrong, while that's not 3 wide receivers, he could still end up surprising people and having enough passing volume this year to support all 3 guys. And once again, at the very least, lead to weeks where Tory Horton is having spike weeks and being a viable option against soft defenses. So, at the very least, make sure your eyes are peeled early in the season for Tory Horton. He could end up being a true waiver wire gem. That'll do it for today's video. There are 5 deep sleeper wide receivers that you guys absolutely need to start considering drafting heading into the 2025 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way out. If you guys have any fantasy football questions whatsoever, drop them in the comments down below. I'll get back to you guys when I can. And when the playlists pop up on the screen, wherever they end up popping up, make sure you guys check out some of our other content for the 2025 fantasy football season to help you guys dominate and prepare for the 2025 fantasy football season. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.